Hello and welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast. I'm Oscar Brummel, and today my guest is Jim Lerario of SLACKING. SLACKING is a really good, newer, bizarre, psychedelic noise project hailing from Pittsburgh, and in the background right now you're hearing a sample of his new 7-inch on Tribe Tapes. If you're a fan of this podcast, please support it at patreon.com/White Centipede Noise. Hey, Jim. Welcome to White Centipede Noise Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Oscar.
Great to see you and great to meet you. So your project's Slacking. I'm a big fan of the project since I heard it a couple years ago. And one thing that kind of strikes me about it, and I think the Prosnag CD used this somewhere in the description maybe, or it was mentioned, I think, by Will at some point. He mentioned that Slacking is a project that kind of keeps it like 90s style, which I don't know if that's the right thing to describe. It's definitely not the right thing to describe your work, but there's something to that, in that there's something about your work that really does, I feel like it has that kind of like pre-the Rita approach to noise, where kind of that 2000s onward harsh noise is really, really texture focused, really, really kind of pedal, and it's high precision in many cases. It's very crunch focused and almost not very source focused. Like a lot of times you can't, it's really, really pure in that sense. Like you can't a lot of times make out sources beyond like metal. You just hear these various layers and types and flavors and colors of kind of distortion. Whereas your work, and I think the 90s thing is kind of like the sources that kind of have this are the core of it. It's like it feels very source based, and then it has a crunchy, blown out sound to it. But it's like Skinner said when he was talking about the texture approach to harsh noise. It's almost incidental to texture. The texture is there, and it's a big foundation of it. But it's not like you're focusing on creating that texture. The texture happens. So that's kind of my ramble scramble about what I hear in your work. Is that kind of wild, creative, free play with the sources, and then the processing of them in a way that's maybe secondary to that editing. Is that true? Is that kind of accurate in any way?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very low tech. That might be also another reason to associate it with like older stuff.
That's funny though. That's funny that your product, and I think some other products that have kind of this really diverse and rich undercurrent to the sound, a lot of times, which it sounds to me like it's very it's very like set and very dialed in. But when I talk to a lot of people like that, they say it's a very, very low tech and kind of primitive approach. Can you kind of describe a little bit more about your compositional / gear approach to making noise tracks, how you kind of go about that?
Sure. It's mostly focused on the source sounds. So it's got to have good source sounds, and I don't really want to like distort them too much or over process them too much. I want them to speak for themselves. So a lot of source sounds onto tape, boosters, running through boosters, and things like that. So yeah.
What's a booster?
Oh, I mean like EQ or
Okay.
compression, like anything to just like boost it.
Sure, sure, sure. Okay.
But yeah, and it just collage.
What's what guides you in choosing your sources? Because I mean, we're gonna get for sure to your kind of thematics and aesthetics of the product, which are also very unique. But what is the kind of the main guiding force that leads you to certain sources and the feeling of them? It does have a very psychedelic overall feel, your noise,
Thank
and
you.
bizarre and kind of I don't want to say humorous, but kind of a bizarre, surreal vibe. Where are these sources usually coming from?
Um, all over the place. I carry like a microphone uh, with me almost everywhere I go, just to in case like there's some kind of sound. I get a lot of sounds at work. I work in like an industrial environment, so there's always sounds there from that end of the sound spectrum. I like to collect old like recordings, like old weird records and tapes, just weird, obscure, strange things. Yeah, uh, I do like the balance of like the psychedelic stuff with the sort of zany, weird with the industrial, kind of like bringing that all together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is kind of a side note, but when when we talk about psychedelic noise, noise that sounds psychedelic, aside from the images or the presentation or aesthetics, which might kind of give a certain psychedelic feel away, what is it in sound or noise that makes something psychedelic, in your opinion? Like,
I think like things that make it sound disorienting or confusing. Those are those are strong characteristics, I think, to make something psychedelic. Um, but also the way you mix it, that has a lot to
yeah,
do with it.
is there a lot of like human voice present in the sources that you use?
Uh, Sometimes, yeah, 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 for sure. I think overall, I use my own voice a lot, um, in more like weird ways. Not really. Um, I get a lot of like voice sounds and mouth sounds, things like that. And
Of your
also, I
own?
sample other people's voices too.
That's cool. That's something that I think is also an element of harsh noise that I think gets thrown by the wayside. I know, like, when I started doing noise, that was kind of one of the first things I figured out. Was like, I think I just had like started out with just kind of like a microphone and like into a few pedals, and it was like feeding back on itself, and it could do things. But then once you realize, like, one of the first crazy ways you can modulate it is like doing things with your voice. And I did that a lot in the early stuff, but then I kind of stopped doing it because it seemed too, I don't know, it seemed too wacky or old. Like, it seemed like too Emil Bolio or something like that, you know? And I feel
Yeah,
I feel like people kind of shy away from that a lot of times in more modern noise. I don't know if it's a self-conscious thing or if it's just a purely aesthetic thing, but you use that. You go for that, right? So some of those voices that we're hearing on that's you.
yeah.
And what about processing the sound? I mean, it does have a ton of great blown out texture. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it has very crunchy, churning, chunky sound. What are you often processing to get that sound?
Um, I guess a few different things. I do, I do load up tapes like pretty loud in the red. That does a lot. Also, um, you know, I use like amplifiers a lot, uh, and especially if they have like overdrive or gain on them, like I'll incorporate that. You know, I don't use a ton of distortion. Not to say that I never do, but I really try to not. Like, I just think it ruins a lot of what the sounds that I have.
Hmm.
Um, but I use it sometimes.
Like a distortion. You're talking about, because I mean, you're talking about a distortion pedal versus distortion from
Right.
an
Yeah.
overdriven
Right.
circuit.
Yeah. I use distortion pedals sparingly, but not too often. Overdrive, definitely, to help, like, drive a signal, uh, to get that crunch. Yeah.
Do you think do you think there's a difference sonically between distorting something with like a distortion circuit and overdriving? Because I do feel like, yeah, a lot of times when I'm working, you get a certain rugged crunch, but you preserve the source much better when you're using kind of an overdrive of say a tape deck or something like that. But distortion, like a metal muff or something, that always seems like it's putting something over the sound, like a sheet. But I would think that they're kind of technically the same process happening. I'm not really sure though. I'm not really sure what the technical difference is there. If there's actually just a different type of circuit that's being distorted, or if there is truly being a second color blended with the mix. I don't know. Do you know much about that?
Right. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I do. I mean, there's definitely a difference. Yeah, distortion tends to sort of blanket your sound in this fuzz, which can be great. But overdrive, I feel like it almost, like, you can use it to boost the signal and add like a slight amount of distortion, but without taking away from the source sound. So
Hmm.
keeping like some of those details in there without just completely covering them up and burying them. So even with like an overdrive pedal.
Do you do you consider slacking an industrial project in any way, or belonging to industrial music, or do you classify it in some way?
Um, I don't personally think of it as industrial or overtly industrial. I know that, it's in that same world. I always classify it as like just abstract, uh, noise, or, it's funny whenever you have to describe like what you do to somebody that doesn't like know anything about this, and try to
Yeah,
find like the best words to use. I usually say sound collage, abstract sound collage.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting topic. How often do you how often do you have to do that, and how often do you actually go further enough to actually feel like there's like do you ever end up actually showing someone what you do, or really understanding what they think you do?
Yeah, sometimes I try to not go there with, like, I try to keep it real short. If someone finds out something and asks, I try to keep it, uh, I don't like to go into it, but, sometimes they keep asking questions, and, yeah, like, people say, oh, so you're a DJ. It's like, no,
Yeah,
you know, if you say you do electronic music or something, to keep it simple, I think you're a
yeah,
DJ.
yeah.
And then another thing I'll say is, like, a good reference point would be like ASMR. like because people know what that is.
Yeah,
Um, and so
true.
I think it's like more of a abstract form of ASMR, maybe.
Hmm. That's true. Yeah. The electronic music is really big here in like a popular way, like in Germany. Like people have associations with certain, I guess what is called ambient, like techno or ambient stuff, which sounds nothing like what I think of as ambient music at all, but kind of different techno artists that use some sort. So yeah, I mean, when you say electronic musician and they say, oh, like techno, and you say, well, like more experimental, and they are always like, oh, like so and like DJ this, and it's really, yeah, it's really really far off, but it's still interesting to always have that different frame of reference, but it's
Yeah,
very usually very very far away.
right.
When you're with your project, which again we still haven't talked about like the aesthetics and the themes, which are a huge huge part of it, but the sound is still very very unique and interesting and rich on its own. Do you have rules or things you consciously avoid, or do you have when you when you're putting a piece together, do you have goals that you want to achieve with it, sound wise, feeling wise, on a kind of more subconscious level, or is it more of a cerebral process?
Um, well, I like there's a few rules maybe. I mainly record on a tape, very very little digital. So that's sort of just a personal preference. Um, um, and I guess like with the different releases, like there's themes that I sort of work with. Mild themes. They're not like in the forefront, but it kind of helps to keep me working within certain boundaries. And so, um, yeah, just like um, like the first tape I self-released was uh, a, the underlying theme would have been like consumption
Hmm.
and waste. Uh, you know,
What's the name of that tape?
that was Revolutions of Mortal Spoils.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of tape loops in there and stuff of just things that I had been consuming. Um, food, drink, energy, electricity, uh,
Hmm.
anything that I could think of.
Like recordings of you eating and drinking, for example.
Yeah, those are in there. Recordings of like, um, you know, what else is in there? There's like just the sound of like ice in water or in like soda. Like there's a lot of like in a really thin plastic cup, you get these kind of cool sounds. I don't know.
Yeah.
Toilets. Uh, you know. Uh, the microwave, making popcorn, things cooking on the stove top, uh, and things like that.
Cool.
I don't know.
I didn't realize that at all. Do most of your releases come together in that kind of way, like that with that eclectic amount of stuff and
Yeah,
sources?
yeah. There's a lot of prep. Like I just collect source material. So yeah, I mean, and it wasn't. It's not all themed source material. I mean, there's also sounds from like my work and things like that in there, and different industrial sounds and things that aren't necessarily related to that theme. But I I gather all those sources to use for to work with the theme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. What about the CD on Prosnag? What's the theme or what can you tell me about that one?
That one is generally just, uh, you know, just, you know, about, like the, like mood swings pretty much. Like the extreme ends of, of that spectrum of, feeling, you know, just being really happy and joyous, and also just being really, you know, run down and sort of depressed, I guess. I don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah, just sort of like, I think that's something everyone can relate to, just the ends of the human emotion spectrum.
Yeah. Is that something you
That's
draw on personal experience from, or is that kind of more of a as an external observer of humans generally?
uh personal. Yeah.
Is that pretty common throughout your work? Is it always quite personal?
Hmm. Yeah, it has to resonate with me to begin with.
Are there ever albums or topics or things that the theme you start out with a theme and it becomes kind of too much to work on, or too unpleasant or irritating or anything like that for personal reasons, like you just don't want to deal with it?
Yeah, there's a couple that I have like a source for, and the ideas all worked out. Actually, I have art and everything, but I can't. I guess I'm just not ready to really put it all together. A little personal, and maybe a little outside of the boundaries of what, like, would be expected, from what I do, or just like the, noise community, maybe.
Hmm.
Uh, I feel like sometimes like earnestness is, uh, you know, frowned upon maybe a little bit. So people, yeah, I don't know.
That's for sure. No, no, that's for sure. That's interesting. That's really interesting. That's something I've always thought, and I always think that, and that is interesting coming from you, because I also do see a certain, like I said, humor or irony almost in the work, and I'm actually appreciating more and more what you're saying about how, kind of earnest and serious a lot of these works really are in their theme and core, which makes, I think, to me, it makes it even more valuable, because I think, yeah, of course, irony, distance, sarcasm, etc., are all like the easiest ways to kind of get by. As an artist, also, you can say something without having to say anything.
Sure, yeah.
But there's quite a level of seriousness in Slacking's material, the stuff that's come out, despite the kind of surreal, bizarre aesthetics.
Yeah, there's a lot of serious, um, earnest things in there, but also a lot of, humor and weird, like, zaniness and things like that too. Sort
Yeah,
of a balance of the two.
yeah, yeah. That's great. Is it is there ever conflict with finding a way to express something earnest as a noise release? Do you ever, or do you feel like your aesthetic, or how you put that together, your imagery, help you express something earnest?
Um, I think in the yeah, yeah, I think in the for me, like, I think the sounds, like, it can be a little more straightforward. showing that through the sound. Um, Through the visual element, it's a little different, maybe like sort of buried in there. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, I'd like to do more with showing that through the sound, though, and in a more upfront, sort of shameless way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. I respect that very, very much. I mean, that is always a thing. I mean, I've thought about many, many times. I mean, and then there's Earnest thing that I'm glad I didn't get too earnest with because I would be looking at it right now and thinking, God, that's
Sure.
embarrassing. But I mean, I have had some ideas that have definitely gone beyond the normal threshold of kind of distanced noise artist personal expression.
Right, right.
It's
I,
difficult.
yeah, yeah, it is. And like you said, it can be, I can understand the hesitation because you might feel self-conscious about it afterwards, after you put it out there.
Right. That's huge though, really, to be honest. I mean, there's not enough of that in my opinion. People putting genuine personal sentiment out there beyond beyond narrow slices of it. I mean, I feel like people are comfortable kind of showing some genuine maybe sides of their sexuality or fetishism, which, that's huge in noise, but I don't think a lot of times people kind of knock that and think, oh, it's the same. I do think a lot of times that's a very sincere expression of something very powerful.
Sure.
So, I mean, I do think that's probably an honest thing for a lot of people, and maybe other sorts of emotions, anger or whatever. But when it doesn't fall into those kind of categories, I mean, there's not much of it. You don't have many people making albums themed around, you know, relationships with individuals or I don't know. I mean, a wide range of personal topics that hugely affect us in our lives. They rarely get kind of channeled into noise music.
I agree. Yeah, and everybody's it's different for everybody, I guess. Like like you said.
Hmm. What about the recent 7-inch you did on Tribe Tapes? It's called Roundhouse of Bootlicker. What's that one about?
Um, I think that one is more has to do more with like social hierarchy and like that sort of game, and my sort of desire to like opt out of that, uh, and just not be a part of that. Um, yeah.
Was there anything in particular that led you or inspired you to want to make that release at this time?
Uh, I don't know about at this time, but it was that's something I felt uh, I've had feelings about for a long time, and I guess they've gotten more intense over time. So uh, just everyday life, pretty much, just sort of inspiring that sentiment.
Hmm. Um, a couple of years ago, I want to say 2, 3 years ago, maybe. Uh, Luke Tandy started mentioning you before I'd kind of seen any of your releases. out circulating in kind of the circles that I guess move in, but he was like, there's this guy slacking. This guy Jim, he's been sending me some stuff. It's fucking really good. It's really weird, but really exciting, interesting stuff. And then about a year later, I would say, maybe less, but I think you and me got in touch, or we reached out to each other, and then I got some of your stuff, and then since then you've kind of had your name placed in quite a few little places, like good labels, and kind of people are becoming aware of your work and talking about it. How did you first get in touch with Luke, and what was that process like in terms of just kind of sort of breaking into listeners and 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 labels and just kind of connecting with people? Is that something you've had experience with before, like with other music scenes, and how to kind of connect with people like that? And network is the kind of the corny term, but it's true. Just kind of like making those relationships and connections. What was your approach to that, or how did you approach that at the beginning?
Um, yeah, it was, I don't have experience with that, or I didn't prior. I used to play in a lot of bands and things like that, but I was never the one doing any networking. Um, in fact, I was probably the most irresponsible of the whole group. So, uh, but I did it. I buy things off of Luke and would interact with him on Discogs. And I made those tapes, and I just wanted to share it with people, So he was one of the first people I asked if I, could just send him a copy. I didn't ever expect him to even listen to it or anything. And yeah, and when he did listen to it and messaged me, I was really surprised. I didn't think that even if he did listen to it, that he would really like it. Yeah, I was pretty excited about that. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
And then where to go from there? I mean, how have you kind of built those relationships from there?
Um, you know, one at a time, just like making friends basically. So I sent him tapes. I sent Will a tape. I sent a number of
Will
people.
Van Gorder?
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I sent, just a handful of people, and like some local people that I'd been interacting with for years.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was a real organic, natural sort of progression there.
How big a part of the whole experience is the kind of social connection when dealing with noise, and whether it be at shows or long distance kind of pen pal situations? How big a part of that is in terms of like the satisfaction or fulfillment is that for you?
I think it's pretty big. I think that I'd still be making stuff if it weren't for that, just because I like to do it. But that makes it almost it makes it a lot more fun. And I guess, I mean, in being introduced to other people's sounds and art, I mean, that's one of the best things about it. And just meeting
Yeah,
so many cool people and making friends that way.
yeah,
Yeah, that's inspiring in itself.
cool. You are from Pittsburgh, right? You live in Pittsburgh?
Yeah,
Is
a
that
little
true?
about 30 minutes outside of the city.
Okay. And you're from that area?
Hmm.
Pittsburgh has a pretty rich noise industrial history. I mean, I maybe much more than I'm aware of, but the obvious infamous names would be Macronympha, Joe Romer, Roger Stella. I mean, they even made an album called Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
And it seems like they at least drew a lot of inspiration directly from the city. And I've only been there for maybe like one day, less than a day, so I can't really speak to it myself. But it seemed to me that was like the vibe, the spirit of the city had a very special meaning, at least for their very particular brand of noise, which at the time I think when they came out was very very inventive. You know,
Certainly.
um, what is the city like nowadays, and do you think it has that spirit that you know is channeled through the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania LP, for example? And is that something you can still relate to and find in the city?
Um, yeah, I think that the city has changed a lot since then. You know, lots of gentrification, and I mean, historically, it's a very industrial town, um, and it still is. Um, but I think in the present, a lot of it. Um, I think the thing about Pittsburgh would be that it's an artistic town and it's also affordable. So a lot of people move here. A lot of artists and musicians move here. Um, so there's a lot of that happening here. And as far as like noise goes, just the fact that Macronympha is from Pittsburgh, kind of, it's inspired generations of other people doing similar things. Um, so I don't know how much the city itself has to do with it at this point. Maybe it did back
Hmm.
then, but at this point, it seems like the history of other musicians and artists here have just inspired
Yeah,
generations, you know?
yeah. And it seems like there's quite a strong Pittsburgh scene going on right now, which seems fairly new, but like also in the past 5+ years, seems like a lot of artists are living in and around Pittsburgh and doing a lot of stuff. What's going on in Pittsburgh right now?
There is a lot, yeah. We have at least a couple good venues that cater to this sort of thing. Um,
Cool.
and uh, that's huge. Yeah, a lot of people moving here from other cities, which is really interesting. I just heard the other day that someone else is going to be moving here from like, uh, I don't know, North Dakota or something. Um,
Uh-huh. Another
yeah,
noise
someone
rocker.
that I think everyone probably knows.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Uh, I know that like Max Eastman is going to be moving here, I think in the
Oh,
summer, who does Tribe
wow.
tapes.
Yeah,
Uh,
cool.
maybe, I think so. But
Sure.
yeah, it seems like a really rich group of people.
And what about yeah, what tell me about Henry Mallard. Mallard Theory. He seems to be putting on a lot of stuff there and it's a pretty big part of that
Oh,
scene,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, certainly. And he's been doing it for over 10 years at this point, booking shows, seeking out artists. He's always scouring the internet looking for a new uh, Pittsburgh musician with noise tagged in the description. And he was the first person to reach out to me. I'm pretty sure that's how he found me. Just said Pittsburgh and noise, and there you go.
cool.
yeah, he's really passionate and incredible, like live and whatnot. All his
Yeah.
recordings and stuff are great. Yeah, he's a huge factor here.
He's the same dude that Ron from Triple R, from R Records or whatever, put out a tape of his like at least 10 years ago, I think, when he was like 13 or something like that.
Wow.
And I remember Ron was like, there's this kid, he's super into noise, he's young. His mom like brings him to the shop and he's all about it. And I'm putting on his tape. And I think at that time he hadn't done any new releases for a very long time. So it was like
Wow.
a big thing. He gave this kid this cosign. And I don't think I heard it at the time, but I wasn't sure what to make of it or. But yeah, 10 plus years later, he's kind of the king of Pittsburgh, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd be really curious to hear that. I actually didn't know about that Triple R release.
I have to pull it. I have to look it up again. And I feel like it was under the name Mallard Theory.
Wow.
It might have been under some other name. I have to double check that. But yeah, for sure, that was him. I mean, I made that. I talked to him recently, and I did make that connection.
That's so cool.
So that's super cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he seems like he's really, really doing a lot in Pittsburgh. Romer did send me a package recently, and like he had this sticker that he put in the package, and it just says Pittsburgh. I've got it here somewhere on here, but it says Pittsburgh Noise, and it's super cool.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's a label. I don't know if it's still happening, called Sour Tapes here, that did like a
Uh-huh.
whole series called Pittsburgh Noise. Um, and yeah, that's where that sticker came from.
Nice.
Yeah.
What about those guys? Romer and Stella. Are they still involved? I mean, okay, I don't think Stella lives in Pittsburgh anymore, but Romer still lives in his same old spot.
Hmm.
Is he involved in the kind of modern incarnation of the Pittsburgh noise scene?
Yeah, yeah, he's really supportive. He plays out. Um, he uh, he did a Macronympha set uh, over the summer with Henry and John Grimaldi, and it was great. I think
Sick.
that's going to be released at some point.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
we did a Coxine Investigators set opening up for Aaron Dillaway.
Nice.
That was
That
really,
was yeah, recently, right?
yeah, that was,
Were you playing with him?
yeah, I was really excited to be asked to be a part of that. Um, uh, he's doing a Viper set soon, like next month. He's playing
Nice.
out as Viper. I'm really pumped to see that. But yeah, he's like,
Viper's cool.
yeah,
Viper's really there's some really good. I'm putting out a Viper tape soon. That's really really good.
I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
great. He's such a sweet guy, like really
Yeah.
supportive and nice and funny. He's great.
For sure. Yeah. Awesome. That's great. That's really cool to hear that he's involved like that. I'd kind of gotten the sense that he was.
Yeah.
In terms of your playing live, I've heard that you are also very good live. I think Jim mentioned that on the podcast. I think he said, slacking. I think maybe one of his top recent noise releases, I think, was the CDR you did on Prosnag. And he said, and bonus points because he's really good live. How does your live performance and your approach compare to your recording approach, and what is slacking like live?
Um, uh, I try my best live. I'm surprised that Jim said that because um, I never thought that my shows were very successful, but yeah, I try to sort of do um, a similar thing as I do on the recordings. the cuts aren't always the smoothest, you know, but
Yeah.
I the palette isn't as big, but I like to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the other thing, and just sort of like try to make that work live. Um,
Do you find that hard? Because I always feel like from personal experience, I consider myself pretty bad live, and I also think that like a lot of that is I find it very hard to blend multiple sources or multiple kind of channels or tracks and utilize them and switch between them in a way that flows or at least has proper contrast and energy in a live setting. Whereas, in post production you can fix that. You can mess around with what didn't switch over properly, for example.
right. Yeah, that is tough. Um, I guess I think like I try not to go with too much gear. I don't, I try to keep it as compact as I can. But there's a couple pieces of gear that make it a lot easier to do that sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
like channel switch sort of pedals and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just to get like quick changes in the sound source.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which I haven't even really used those live, but I'm going to start doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. I also feel like, yeah, using some sort of overdrive, like master overdrive or master kind of compressor also really helps, that you have some sort of, like, that's kind of my secret is that I don't, I run everything basically through one 4 track as the main mixer
Okay.
because that'll usually kind of squash everything in a similar to a similar level and with a similar color.
Yeah.
Whereas, if I'm
Yeah.
if I'm switching between like naked channels on a mixer, it's like they can be so clean that the differences
Like,
can really pop out much more. You know what I mean?
right. Right. That's a very good point.
So I, I kind of mentioned your aesthetic and your vibe of your stuff as being psychedelic and kind of surreal and bizarre. And people who have heard your stuff and seen your stuff will definitely know what that means. And they've heard in the intro a bit of your work if they don't own any of it. Basically, can you talk about your aesthetic down to the details? Because it's very specific and it's very different from the standard noise aesthetic. Are you trying to like reach something kind of disturbing or nightmarish or nostalgic with the imagery? Because like I don't have anything in front of me that I can really reference specifically, but like pixelation of images, kind of unnatural cropping of images, neon colors, clashing colors, fonts that kind of, one would traditionally consider ugly or out of date or, things like that. Like these kind of clashing, bizarre but digital aesthetics. Can you speak a little bit about on that if you can in some way?
Sure. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. I think nostalgia does play a part in that. Like I grew up in the '90s, so uh, you know, like it it didn't look as good back then. Nothing like films and everything was on a tape, and I guess I always liked that. Um, I don't want it to be, I guess it's maybe hmm. Um, I do like to choose like, yeah, clashing colors and odd fonts that just sort of, um, you know, like I like to look at other graphic designers out there, or not other graphic designers, but other, uh, just the graphic design and, all around you, and
Mm-hmm.
sort of pull different things that I find interesting or that I like about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times you have fonts and uh, things like that. Um, I get those ideas from. Um, yeah, and also just, I guess, the different moods, like I said, like maybe a sense of hazy nostalgia, but also, you mentioned like fear or nightmare imagery or something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like sort of dreamy, like dream logic, sort of, you
Mm-hmm.
know, things that don't really quite make sense in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah.
Do you think there is some sort of like unified, maybe not unified, but rather the opposite, but coherent new aesthetic being established within noise or movement that's maybe time, maybe it's time based, like on the fact that we're at this moment in time, and that there seems to be some sort of new aesthetic emerging that's going pretty wide. And I mean, of course people influence each other and that, but
Yeah.
do you think it's more than that?
I think it is like there is like a generational sort of nostalgia there, maybe, or like um, yeah, that's hard to say. I guess like people just finding these, uh, having these common tastes, maybe. Um, that, I mean, I think there are people now too that are much younger than I am that have the same sort of taste, and I wonder where that it
Hmm.
comes from for them, because they, weren't really around back then.
Yeah.
So I wonder where they get it from. But I guess,
Yeah.
you also have like, people starting, you know, garage rock bands that sound like they came from the early 60s or something,
Right.
So yeah, it's an interesting thought. I'm
Yeah.
not really sure.
There was a question from someone on Patreon, and this is a quite unrelated question to all this, but they want to know, what is your favorite non-noise album?
Um, I would have to say, uh, Radiohead's Kid A.
Cool.
That would
All
probably
right.
be it.
And you did music also, you said it before doing noise. What sort of music were you doing? I mean, you mentioned bands.
Oh, yeah. Just bad music. I played in like noise rock bands, and punk bands and things like that. Um, and the last one that I was in was a long time ago. I wouldn't even want to say. I don't want to
Uh-huh.
give up my age that easily, but maybe I already have. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
been, you know, probably 13, 12, 13 years since I've been in a situation like that.
What? what spurred you to then start a noise project? I mean, Slacking is fairly new. I mean, I don't think you had noise projects before then. Was that right?
That's correct. Um,
What inspired you to do that at this point in your life?
I just listened to it, been a fan of it for a long time, and all kinds of weird, unusual music. That's always been a major interest of mine. Um, so I started doing it on my own, just for myself, making shitty recordings. You know, and they sucked, but I always enjoyed doing it. It's just like
Hmm.
a gravitational pull. Um, and that's why I mean, if Henry never would have like messaged me, or um, I'd probably still just be making some shit, uh, but
Was
yeah,
he really the first person that messaged you to like before you'd been in contact with anyone?
well, I had been in contact with people, but only to like get their stuff, you know,
Hmm.
um,
Not as an artist.
not as an artist. Yeah, he was the first one. Yeah.
Cool.
And probably like
Wow.
2 days after I posted something, the
Wow.
first thing I
Cool.
posted, like 2 days later, Henry messaged me.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Good for him. Someone also asked about your collaboration with Richard Ramirez. There's a tape, I think, on either it's Deadline or Room 2A, one of his
Hmm.
imprints that he has released. And it's, yeah, it's a collaboration with you. I unfortunately haven't heard it, but I'm really, 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 really excited to, hopefully soon. What was that collaboration like, and how did that come about, and what was working on it like?
Um, well, it came about just from like meeting Richard. I met him a few times at shows, and it was just always like a real quick thing. Like I would just want to go up to him and tell him, he did a great set, and
Hmm.
and then I'd go to another show and sort of say it again. Eventually, I think he might have like maybe I became a familiar face, maybe.
Yeah.
And after after playing some shows myself, got much closer with like him and Sean, and
Yeah.
yeah, and they Richard presented the idea of doing a collaboration, and I was really surprised that he would want to do it with me. And they invited me over to their house and recorded it
Cool.
in their living room. Uh,
Nice.
it was a really very cool experience. I hope to do something like that again. But
Awesome.
yeah, yeah, they're really sweet people.
Very cool. I hope that recording can get out there. I would love to hear that. I think that sounds like a great combination. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it is quite remarkable that they are now living in, I don't know how close to Pittsburgh, but fairly close. Jim Harris, there's really a lot going on in that little area of Pennsylvania, it seems.
Yeah, yeah,
Romer, I mean, it's like legendary artists and new artists kind of all,
yeah. It's
and kind of the middle generation kind of bridging that gap, all kind of living and seemingly working around with each other right now.
yeah, it's pretty surreal. Um, yeah, having Jim here and Richard and Sean moving. I mean, I think that's done a lot in itself for like the local uh, scene or whatever.
Yeah, Awesome.
Yeah, they brought a lot of people together, I think.
Um, what's coming up? I've seen some whisperings about things here or there, but what are the next things coming up in the nearest future from Slacking?
Well, there's a collaboration with Henry with Mallard Theory.
Right.
Um, I'm working on finishing that up, and um, there's you know some other things after that. I'm working on another full length that won't be out for a while, but
Great.
yeah, that's going to take a lot of time. But yeah, and just some shows. I have some shows for the spring. Trying to get more, maybe do some out of town gigs over the summer.
Nice.
Yeah.
Are there any particular places that you want to travel to or people you want to meet? Like people that you've kind of been in touch with and want to have the chance to connect with
Yeah.
specifically?
Yeah. I'd love to go up to Providence and like meet Will and
Yeah.
I'd like to arrange something with with Dean. I'd love to meet
Hmm.
Dean.
Yeah.
Uh, we talk a lot. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd like to go out to Philly and like meet KPG. Uh,
Yeah.
we've talked about doing some shows, me and Ken. Um, so yeah,
Nice.
hopefully something happens.
Can you tell me your top five noise releases of all time?
Okay. Um, Definitely Macronympha's Grind. That
Mm-hmm.
was one of the first harsh, like really harsh things I ever heard, and it, yeah, that one's invaluable. Um, uh, I'd say uh, Spiral and Santa by Nurse with Wound. That's a
Mm-hmm.
huge one. Uh, Nurse with Wound is like huge for me. Um,
Cool.
that's one of the best ones. I'd say Going Places from Yellow Swans.
Mm-hmm.
That's a gorgeous, like beautiful album. Uh, um,
That's a band that I don't hear get as much, I think, recognition or at least shout outs these days as they probably deserve. Because, I mean, even if people aren't listening to them as much these days, I think they were still such a influential band when they were really active,
yeah,
especially in terms of like being like a gateway for people getting into noise because they were huge for a while and you could find their records at like for me they were big because they were the one when I was trying to find out about noise and finding out about noise, they were one of the bigger bands and you could find their stuff at quite a lot of record stores, at least in town, you know,
yeah,
whereas a lot
yeah,
of that other more really obscure and harsh stuff was I wasn't, you weren't able to find that yet until you found the right, underground channels. But Yellow Swans was like pretty accessible to
yeah,
find,
definitely.
and they had some great stuff.
Yeah, they do. And I actually haven't even heard like a whole lot of their stuff. The things I
Yeah.
have heard are great. That album in particular is, I think it might be their final album, maybe,
Hmm.
or at least close to it. But it's gorgeous. I mean, there's a lot of emotion and beauty in there.
Hmm.
It's definitely different for the genre, I think.
Sorry, I interrupted. I think that was three.
Okay. I'd say Dillaway's Gag File.
Mm-hmm.
That's not even like very old, but I mean, everything he does is fantastic. But that one still blows me away. Boy, that's tough. There's so many, you know.
Yeah.
um,
The first four are easy. The fifth one's hard.
yeah. We'll say Obes, Cardiac Strain.
Mm-hmm.
That's like that's one of the he uses like the pulse as a source on that, and it's just
Right.
really powerful, really deep recording. Yeah.
Cool. Great. What about 5 newer releases of the past year or so?
There's been so many good things coming out in the last couple of years, it seems like.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I'll say that Spate Dog Mono CD just came
Yep,
out like last year. That's like,
for sure.
man, that's some good stuff. That oh man, you talked about this one, that Connive tape. Um,
Oh,
that actually have it right here.
yeah.
I can't think of what it's called, but
Recluse Activities? Yeah,
yeah,
that's good.
this
That's
is
really good.
really good.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's kick-ass.
there was this dude I met in Houston, um, who does a project called Garland,
Mm-hmm.
and he did this CD, the CDR. That's like one of the best things I've heard in the last few years. Really eclectic, lots of different sounds, false starts, really good. And it's like 15 minutes long or maybe even less.
Wow.
It's got this like really good artwork that sort of reminds me of like some self-abuse stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really good. This guy, Vincent in Houston.
Garland, that rings a bell. I think I've come across that somewhere, but that's good to
Yeah, I
remember.
would definitely keep your ears open for that, because
Cool.
I don't know how much he's done. I don't think like I think that this might be it, but I hope he does more.
Awesome.
That was 3.
I think those 3, yeah.
I'd say that Hand in Me, Kate Sith, that he
Mm-hmm.
put out last year is really good. Really, there's like melancholy in there, and
Yeah.
and industrial. I mean, it's like a really good mix. That's a great one. And I'd say that Moonbeam Terror double tape that Overwhelming Alive, that Summer Interlude put out.
Cool.
It's really great, eclectic, powerful.
Yeah. Well, what else? What else you got on your mind? What else can you tell me about?
Well,
I can see there's something. In the extended second half of this interview, Jim and I kind of lose the interview format and just start chatting and freeballing it back and forth on a number of topics. So if you enjoyed the first half, head over to patreon.com/white centipede noise now to check out the second half. If you're listening and watching right now and not yet supporting, I would ask that you really please consider at this time becoming a Patreon supporter. I don't really like putting too much of my personal business out there, but I am having a baby in April, and I really, really need the people who listen to and appreciate this podcast to support it via Patreon. Patreon support is really the only way I'm able to do this and the way I'll be able to carry it on into the future. So if you want to make sure this podcast keeps going strong, please head over to patreon.com/whitecentipedeNoise now and check out the various levels of support, the various benefits of supporting, and sign up for something that fits you. I really do my best to keep the Patreon interesting and full of quality stuff and surprises, so if you sign up, I'm sure you won't regret it. There are extended segments of all the new interviews, there's bonus WCN TV episodes, there's a Discord server, I like to get bonus content and media from the guests when possible, I do pretty regular giveaways of physical merch, there are discounts at the mail order, much, much more. I want to sincerely thank everyone who's a supporter already, and particularly those who in the past week or so have signed up new, rejoined after a pause, or upped their level of support. Shout out to the Maniac Circle, and an extra special thank you to the heavy sponsors, Logan Chelmo, Joshua Peer, Casper Sonnet, Christoph Rushak, John Ingram, Dries, Shane Taylor, DF, Lars Kenzie, Eric Nystrand, and those who don't wish to be named. I appreciate all of you so, so much. All right, take care till next time.
Believe in the Lord. Pray to God, but they give him only lip service. They give God lip service.